Good morning again to all we gatherings of dust. Is it true that we are alone? Consider that question briefly, friends. Have you ever felt lonely? If you felt lonely recently, even in a gathering of friends, it's possible to feel alone in our own heart, in our own head. And from these poems and Bell Hooks' perspective and our own tendency to move towards reason, to consider our interconnection with things and this theme of interdependence, maybe consider that we collectively, with all things here, emerge from a planetary matrix that is the interweavings of all the chemical and temperature and all the forces at play on this planet, friends, coming together in all the ways that they do and all the ways that they have to make this possible. Perhaps not by destiny, perhaps by chance, but here we are nonetheless, of common origin, belonging to a family of animals, a family of life, a family of things. As Mary Oliver writes, you do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of the body love what it loves. Meanwhile, the wild geese high in the clean blue air are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. This unity, this togetherness does not erode our uniqueness nor our specialization. We have our place, so we are not alone then. But then from whence comes the often talked about pandemic of loneliness? Certainly it was compounded by COVID, but it didn't begin in 2020. The Department of Health and Human Services released a 2023 report noting that half of US adults report feelings of acute loneliness and isolation. It can be easy enough to sit in those gaps of little oblivions where we aren't so aware of our inner world, distracted by work, numbed with comfort, until we remember taking stock of our lives and finding a human-shaped hole in our heart. If this doesn't ring a bell for you, friends, trust that it does ring a bell for many younger people in our country. There are stakes, y'all. The same report tells us that the physical consequences of poor connection can be devastating. 29% increased risk of heart disease, 32% increased risk of stroke, a 50% increased risk of developing dementia for older adults. Connections keep us human. Outside of the context of love, it doesn't really mean anything. This is why I've been trying to find friends, younger friends in particular, to arrange visits with our older friends who can't visit us here in person. It's vital. It's life-saving. Just a few moments, a warm hand to hold, a kind smile. But y'all, how did we get here? How did we get here? We are a social species. If we consider our primateness, we understand most primates to be a social species. What has happened? Let's talk about economics. Not my specialty, but here we go. So from our historical position, it could be tempting to look back on capitalism as some kind of ancient endeavor, and surely people have been trading apples for oranges forever, but that's not what we're talking about here. Even the earliest stirrings of mercantilism don't emerge until, say, the 17th century, which would eventually overtake feudalism in Europe, and presenting new challenges, new masters, new chains as land, resources, and people are reduced to commodities. This has happened before, but it's intensified in strange new ways. Capitalism as we know it is an even more recent phenomenon, more connected with the Industrial Revolution, like clocks are a product of this, friends. The Industrial Revolution changes everything, how we conceive of time, talent, treasure, how we hold relationships with ourselves and our families, our communities, our cultures, the planet, against the demands to be productive. Our own worth has in many ways been reduced to whether or not we are productive. Ask your heart, friends. Ask your heart how it feels when you tell yourself or are told that you are being lazy. We are not evolved for the mindset of this kind of grind. Rather than present potential opportunities to seek new ways of being, the acceleration of technology and hyperconnectivity has, if anything, intensified this feeling of isolation and dislocation, cut off from the crucial flesh and blood human connections that form this planet itself. Where do we belong? To whom do we belong? To far too many people these days, the answer to those questions may well be nowhere and no one. This is particularly the case for many young men. We don't often talk about the plight of men, but given the rise in reactionary rhetoric and polarization, I believe we have to, right? As industries have shifted, many people have been left behind. As social conditions have changed, the story many young men, not arguably young people in general, but young men in particular, are fed about their place in the world has proved to be a fiction. The hyper-individualistic worldview proves too often to be poison, and yet the animal heart longs for connection, and it will find it. Imagine you're a young man in your 20s, few connections to family, very few, if any, real-life relationships with people or other stable people. Turning to social media, perhaps you find yourself drawn to groups of other lonely men, and you begin to discuss your dissatisfaction, your feelings of being a failure regarding those big promises you were bent on fulfilling. Every angry idea, every hateful bias, every word of rage becomes magnified, celebrated in those echo chambers. Suppose you found some time later that you had been associating with some kind of white nationalist group. Even if you thought this was cringe and wanted to leave, are you going to be lonely again? Are you going to be lonely again? I've seen this happen to people, friends. It's terrifying and tragic. Loneliness can make people do unthinkable things, and so we must speak of it. I'm not a betting gal, but if I were, I'd put money on this phenomenon driving reactionary groups and intensifying our isolation as a culprit and the political polarization in our country. It's almost as if we hunger after ourselves, forgetting our place in the family of things. That hunger can drive us into the depths, spiraling into scary shapes, y'all, into January 6th in Charlottesville, Club Q. It's a nihilistic, self-consuming spiral that leaves hurt people in its wake, all mirroring and manifested by the hungry drive of late capital. Strangely, it mirrors original myths of this land, particularly that horror in the folklore of indigenous people in the North Woods. Not too scary, friends, don't worry. The Wendigo, perhaps you have heard of this creature, a mythical beast born from one who caves to that most ancient taboos of eating another person. But in lean winters, when the hunger for one's own self and survival dominates the need of community, the connections that hold us together, when that hunger manifests like this, monsters can be made out of people, and we forget where we belong. In a section of her work, Braiding Sweetgrass, Robin Wall Kimmerer explores this mythic motif. She says the Wendigo is the legendary creature of our Anishinaabe people, the villain of a tale told on freezing nights in the North Woods. Its heart is made of ice. The monster is no bear or howling wolf. Wendigos are not born, they are made. The Wendigo is a human being who has become a cannibal. Its bite will transform other people. It is said that the Wendigo will never enter the spirit world, but will suffer the eternal pain of need, its essence a hunger that won't be sated. The more it eats, the more ravenous it becomes. Consumed by consumption, it lays waste to nature and humanity. Robin Wall Kimmerer goes on to draw an allegory between this creature and the cultures of late capital here in the West, a force which hungers after its own self, promoting growth for its own sake, fabricated scarcity, planned obsolescence, the historic and tragically present denial of workers to be fairly compensated for their labor, y'all, the black boxing of technology so that those born and often named technological natives may be ignorant of the inner workings of the technology that they rely upon. A culture of hyper-hunger, hyper-connection, hyper-individualism, leading to so many in this land feeling isolated, dislocated, distanced from community and denatured from the earth. Well, thank God that there are communities like this, places where people can go and find connection, warmth, a friend. We're going to explore some potential paths around this, y'all, mostly thinking about how we might employ some of that inner self-help work that Bell Hooks is talking about, not to feel just better ourselves, but to connect to community and to land and to feel better as a whole so that we may be better. But as we continue, I invite you to consider Kimmerer's allegory of the Wendigo. Have you felt this idea, this ethic, this spirit? Have you felt lonely in the blue light? Where do we belong? To whom do we belong? As social animals, we rise from the dust of the earth over eons of evolution to be together, to, as Terry Pratchett puts it in his Discworld series, to be the place where the falling angel meets the rising ape. Through the tension of both our falling and our reaching, may a new thing bloom. from the compost heap of history. Sown by love's hands, which of course are all our hands, watered by love's sweat and tears, which of course are our sweat and tears, brought into the open air by the warmth of community, the light of reason, the fire of commitment, each of us, individuals, and only alone, in our hope, in our doubt, in our love, in that way that blades of grass are alone. Sorry if the Wendigo story got a little spooky, friends. It's a spooky thing, but one I reckon we must speak of. Maybe we are constantly being reborn. Maybe we do have more in common with leaves and all the stuff of life. What would it mean for you? What would it mean for you if this was true? Supposing this speaks to some part of us, for at least some of us, that longing for spiritual soil to sink down roots, how may we hold on to this sense of similarity, this calling of kinship? Maybe we need a reminder. The name of our tradition gets us into trouble sometimes, getting mistaken for Unity Church or the Universal Life Church. But sometimes I can only smile at the creativity folks employ when making this name work for them. Many years ago in a congregational retreat out in Appalachia, one of our leaders and I were taking a break from campfire songs to contemplate the cosmos. I remember him waxing poetic about what these names, Unitarian and Universalist, might mean for us these days. Like, we all come from the same place, Unitary, and we all go to the same place, Universal. Far out, man. Not terribly far off base either, save for the historically Christian, perhaps heretical trappings of both of these names, but perhaps this can be a reminder, pointing not towards transcendence, but to a profound and experiential immanence, the here, the now, the ongoing emergence that we so simply and also wildly complexly are. I don't mean to say that we are all the same any more than I am saying we are all alone. If we are alone, then we are alone like blades of grass, which somehow make a field. Nor does this denigrate our human uniqueness, as is so often the case. Two things can be true at once. We are unique individuals, special in this regard, our worth and dignity contextualized by relationships. That as a species, given our propensity for technology, we're not alone in technology either. Don't crows and otters not also make use of tools? But our unique capacity for language endows us with one power in particular, storytelling. Make no mistake, language is technology, a skill, techne, some way of moving things around in the world, even if that is just ideas. And what are the stories we tell ourselves? What are the stories that have been foisted upon us? The aforementioned Wendigo is a story, a way of grappling through the troubles, of making sense of the mess. Other traditions position a devil, an iblis, an ahriman in this place. I'm not advocating making the Wendigo into a devil. Such an act would position evil away from us when it's very much active in the world. We encounter it, y'all. Perhaps you have thought of some ways that you have felt that spirit in your life, moving around. We encounter it every day. In the war smoke rising, jail cells slamming, food being unaffordable for some people, and the housing prices soaring, the raising of the land for resources, the static sense of isolation and dislocation plaguing this land, engendering a quiet apathy towards the plight of a neighbor. Perhaps we forget just how much we belong to the family of things. Forget our wildness, which is not madness or lack of reason, but our rootedness in the more than human world. We denigrate our feelings too often, perhaps. The primal sense that something is wrong here. As Andrea Gibson says, it is no measure of good health to be well adjusted to a sick society. Maybe we need a reminder, a call to rewild the heart. Rewilding is a practice of returning developed land back to wilderness, not without controversy, of course, but what isn't these days? Reasonable people can have different ideas about the return of wolves to landscapes where farmers are making a living. That's one thing. I reckon one would have to abandon reason to suggest we have no hand in destroying and perhaps restoring the world. But before we can restore the world, though, the broken divisions between people, broken divisions between land, Before we can restore this world, though, not as individuals, but like blades of grass, perhaps we ought to restore ourselves. Touch grass, as people say, a euphemism often thrown around on the internet as a way to tell folks that they're too online, that they need to go outside. Usually this comes from a dismissive place, but perhaps there is something to this. I know many of us are already avidly outdoorsy, gardeners, hikers, you name it, but even engaged in these activities, should we rush, all caught up in ourselves and what we need to do, our ever-growing list of things that we need to do, we may lose touch with what it is that we need. Ask yourself less what you need to do, friends, more what you need. What I speak of is less an activity and more of a disposition, a perspective. To rewild the heart, then, is not to rush off on a wild hunt searching for the self. It is to first recognize that you are it, already arrived, one among the many. By it, I mean you are all of this. The earth experiencing itself. As Carl Sagan would say, we are a way for the cosmos to know itself. How does that feel when you let that in your bones? I might extend that and say we are a way for the cosmos first to feel itself, to feel its beauty and its terror, the tension between the tension between which feelings like awe and wonder are produced, humbling experiences that emerge from reckoning with our position between the destructive and creative forces that underpin existence. This whole solar system is made by exploding stars, y'all. Maybe you knew this. The fruits of science can make us feel tiny, but also grand by comparison. So far, the only creatures we know of that are able to look up, look down, ask these questions with words on our lips, share them in another language with another friend, spread the question. Action, following reflection on this connection, might yield fruits beyond reason, spiritual fruits of kinship with other animals, of course, but also vegetation, even the mineral stuff of this world and beyond. Now, how this rewilding, this simple recognition of sameness juxtaposed with our uniqueness may play out regarding shifting values and behaviors, what we eat, what we do and don't do, I cannot predict, much less dictate. That's not what I'm here for. On this war-ravaged world, ensnared in stories that elevate productivity over people, though, that exalt gross domestic product while ignoring the gross injustices of the day, at the very least, y'all, we need new stories. We are each of us storytellers. If you don't feel like a storyteller because that feels like some high-minded title, consider that everything we do is, in a sense, a story. To reflect on the human condition is to reflect on a narrative. We tell history in stories. Hard to tell history in equations, isn't it? We speak of our own lives in stories. Each of us, endowed from nature toe to tip, to tell a story. We tell by word, we tell by deed. We need to tell one another more often of our love, speak more honestly of our anxieties and fears, but especially the former, to relay and speak and live love and to be able to receive it in turn. In Braiding Sweetgrass, Kimmerer, who is a college professor, tells a story where she asks her students, "Do you love the earth?" And of course, this gathering of environmental sciences students replies in the affirmative, yes, we love the earth. Then she asks, "Do you believe the earth loves you back?" Crickets, confusion. What would it feel like if we invited this sense in? Do we believe our grandmothers of generations gone by might be able to love us if they were here? Imagine a grandmother you've never met before, but whom you are most certainly related to. If we find the argument that life is an emergent property of this planet, that with a particular combination of heat, elements, light, water, and of course time, compelling, making something like life, and eventually creatures like us, perhaps even stranger things, then is it so unreasonable to suggest that this earth is, in a more than superficial or woo-woo sense, our mother, and all of us, and all that is her, the planet's children, the stone and the sea, the sky, whose gases are the results of that self-same life, plants over eons turning carbon dioxide and light and soil and water into the air that rusts your car and fills your lungs? Do you love the earth? I don't feel like I need to ask this question of the people here. Do you believe that the earth loves you back? Perhaps not in a way that we often understand love, right? It's not a commodity, it's something deeper, something older. Does the earth love you back? I invite you to linger with that question today and for as long as it feels comfortable for you to do so, and consider some of the ways we might be able to give back, to share with the planet. I have here Pandora's box. I hope this doesn't get me in trouble. It's full of seeds. Lots of seeds, bird seed mostly. But you know, bird seed sunflowers are cheaper than buying regular sunflower seeds, and the birds will eat them. Some of them may grow. Consider that parable of the sower from the Bible, friends. People go around scattering seeds. Some of them fall in the cracks or in the thorns. Some of them are eaten by birds. That's the point. Birds like seeds. But some of them do take root and grow. We don't know. We don't know. And so we try things. We experiment. We get closer to finding our place on the land, part of nature. It is a trial and error practice. This is just one way amongst many. You might just walk more slowly and notice things around you. If you are, like I am, smack in the middle of Omaha, which is pretty denatured, you are still surrounded by the more than human world. Look closely in the grass. Turn over a stone. Let your inner 4-year-old run wild. After worship today, as folks are heading out, these will be on a table on the patio, positioned so as to not be obstructive to people. If you feel so called, friends, I invite you just to grab a handful of the stuff, walk somewhere not in the major clearing of the grass because they will get mowed over inevitably, but in the margins of the property, just scatter some. Or take some for yourself and place them somewhere else, friends. That's also totally fine. These are for you, and we got a lot of seeds, so knock yourselves out. Not the Ark of the Covenant. Box of seeds. Different covenant. Do you love the earth, friends? But you know, if all of this feels silly, I would invite you to be with that sense of feeling it being silly and consider its source. If this feels like that's not how you do gardening, just throwing seeds everywhere, consider its source. Whatever feelings, if they are elicited, consider their source. Because you, precious child of creation, this is who you are. You are it, the earth experiencing itself. Such a disposition, such a perspective, how can we be anything else but fundamentally and radically interconnected with one another and all that grows green and wild on this planet? May we make a little room in our life for the wild things literally out in the wild, and also the wild things inside of us too. May we seek a reminder so that we may be the reminder, living in the good news of the spiritual practice of touching grass and being that oneness of everything.